Well, today I brought some topics that usually are very, like people say, it's very boring. So I've spent a long time building this talk to show you a step by step on how to use design patterns and how to refactor an application from scratch. So this was crazy, crazy nice. Well, I came all the way from Brazil for the conference tomorrow. Is everyone coming? Ooh, nice. So tomorrow I'm gonna speak there too, but let's get going. So before we start, this whole talk is not just for you to listen to. I want you to go at your home and try out the examples, try understand the whole thing because I know it's a lot of content and sometimes you just get scared, right? So you're gonna have everything. If you can, please take as many pictures as you can. Mention the event. I know this is really hard to make, so support the community, support myself. This helps a lot. Well, on my YouTube channel, I've been making a lot of specific questions. Like my talk tomorrow is about recreating Node.js from scratch. I did a video recreating ESLint, trying to create minifying code, source maps, and it was crazy nice. So one of the things was why people think design patterns or this kind of strategies are so boring or so hard. Well, this was me in 2015, and I was giving a talk. It's like actually was a workshop during the whole night. It usually started like 11 p.m. and ended 4 a.m. This is how I learned programming. So they had a goal for you. You learn for free, and the next week you have to come back and teach what you learned. So I grew a lot with this. So it was S.NET with C#, and then I came with I started working with JavaScript, and I noticed JavaScript is not C#. C# is completely different. C# has a different paradigm, and I started struggling a bit with this. And I noticed JavaScript is very similar to TypeScript, but it's not exactly the same. You cannot apply everything that you have in TypeScript in JavaScript. Well, you can, but you're gonna have to make some workarounds, right? So my first notice was, oh my God, is this just a mess? I was going projects, back then was jQuery, and people mixing up prototypes in the single file application was crazy. I was seeing single file apps, so most of jQuery, Angular, Angular too, yeah, back then, and no tests ever, so people were just creating and not fixing anything, and I noticed no folder structure. In C#, I've seen so many patterns that we had anti-patterns, right? So people say, no, you shouldn't use this. In JavaScript, I felt we were missing a lot in our community. Well, I noticed we can do it, and sometimes we've been using a lot of design patterns, and we don't actually know the name, right? We are just repeating and repeating. So, to get started, I'm gonna cover some very cool concepts. So the first of all is to reuse, and even for smaller applications, these structures are gonna help you to organize your code, to organize your projects. You're gonna learn some design patterns for testing. This for me was really mind-blowing. I didn't know that this exists, and this is pretty useful for like increasing databases. I'm gonna teach you how you can consume terabytes of data in JavaScript if you want, in the browser if you want, so you can consume data on demand, and you can inject behavior. So this is something that we've been doing a lot, but we probably don't know the name. Well, I told you I spent a lot of time on this because I built the whole application. So this application is very simple. You know how my design techniques are, right? So it's just a table. When you put some name, you can filter the table here. Pretty straightforward. All this application is just a single file application, and we're gonna go step by step refactoring it and making better, okay? So as I told you, it's just a simple HTML. A simple or not so simple JavaScript code. So this is a single file application, right? So we're gonna have some global variables there. We're gonna have some functions to parse HTML. We're gonna have the render using the inner HTML, and pretty straightforward, right? We're gonna have all the elements and fetching the database and do everything. Okay, for some studies this might work, but we know that MVP projects starts good, but it ends sometimes really bad, right? So in my opinion, the biggest problem we have there is that we have a single file application, so we don't have a single reason to change, right? We don't have a single reason to change it. So it's hard, and we have global state. Oh my God, this reminds me jQuery and doing like you cannot use this variable because this variable is defined in another library. So this was pretty hard. So the first tip, or the first, I would say, design pattern, but not so design pattern, is the N layers. Has anyone ever seen this one? Nice, nice, nice. So N layers is just like splitting your application in different responsibilities. So we're gonna have the service, which is every or any integration you're gonna have to external calls. You are on the web, you can use this for accessing websites. You're on Node.js to access your database. You're gonna have the view, which is your rendering part, right? The only one that knows the either DOM API or the Node.js CLI API for the UI, okay? And then the controller is the one just making the bridge, right? Calling one and another, but this doesn't know the actually implementation. So this is gonna be nice. So refactoring it, now I'm gonna have the view, and I'm gonna have some standards here, right? All the functions and all the elements are just defined there. And notice I'm using ES modules, so I don't need to wait for the window.load. This is pretty straightforward. The service, all business rules is here now. So if I want to catch any external database, I'm gonna go there. If I wanna do some business rules, right, some computation, I would do from the service, okay? So we just split it in different files, and now we're gonna start making it more testable, right? More easier to maintain using dependency injection. This is pretty pretty common to see in applications, but I often see people not knowing why. So here we're gonna use the controller, which is making the whole bridge between these layers. So I'm gonna receive those layers, and I can call those functions, right? I can call those interfaces, but I don't actually know what is behind them. So this is pretty easier to make, and we're gonna have a init. Well, a spoiler alert, this is key for us to creating universal JavaScript apps without any framework or library. So this is gonna be easy. And then we're gonna have the factory. So factory is amazing for putting all your dependencies on one side. So usually dependency injection and factories are going together. So you're gonna have a single file for importing all the modules, creating your instance, and you can handle for them. Imagine now you are working with a HTML page, which the view could be handling the DOM. But now you're gonna move this application and work on CLI. You can just change the module and everything's still working, right? You don't have to change 3 different files. Okay, software is crazy, right? Sometimes we get crazy ideas. Sometimes our boss just like, oh, this is going pretty well. What if we try doing something, right? What if we try grabbing your index.html page, your web page that's working fine, and we're gonna port it to a CLI program? Well, some people might freak out now, but one thing that we forget about JavaScript is it's a single language to rule them all, right? So we can use JavaScript in the browser, in the Node.js, IoT devices everywhere, even like smartwatches, and we can just reuse this this code everywhere. So this is pretty nice. So I'm gonna show you the abstract factory, which is one of the best patterns for me for creating UIs, even though I'm a backend developer, right? So now you can see, I just splitted all the application in different responsibilities. Even if you don't know any design patterns here, the idea is just break into different files or folders. This is gonna make us, it easier to maintain. So in the console, I'm gonna have the Vue.js file. I'm gonna have the web, but what they are gonna have there is just the signature. I'm gonna show you in a bit. The cool thing here is we're gonna have a shared layer, and this shared layer I can use to control the whole flow. I can have the controller, which as the controller don't know the current or the whole implementation of the file, it's just calling the functions, and it's pretty nice. And then I will have the view, and for the view I can notice which platform I'm running on. So here I notice, well, if the window is not present, probably I'm gonna run this on Node.js, and then I start rendering the CLI. Well, or else I can run on the web and just use DOM APIs and try dynamically importing those modules using exactly the same code. Imagine, hello! Imagine I will have other layers. Imagine I wanna run this on my clock. I can just put different layers here, and it's gonna work pretty well. All right, as I told you, I'm gonna have the console. So view, all those layers are gonna follow the same interface. So they are following the same function names. Why? Because the controller doesn't know what platform it's running, right? They only know the data flow. So on console, the data flow is just render. On the web, just render, and so on. And this is the power of abstraction, right? We can just reuse code. For me, I don't know about you, but when I can, we have this joke, right? When we can automate something that would spend 10 minutes in 2 hours, we can do it. So here, the shared layer, the whole abstraction. As I told you, I don't know what is running behind the scenes, but I know the data flow. All those platforms, all where my application is gonna run, it's gonna call those functions, and it's gonna render depending on the platform it's running on. So this is pretty cool. See, the same application, the same code, but the view, the only thing is different is the view. It's the rendering layer, right? Now, I'm gonna have the beautiful table I had there. And then, on the Node.js side, I'm gonna have the CLI. This breaks some myths, right? Because people say, no, I'm a backend developer because I work on Node.js. I'm a front-end developer because I work on the web. Well, if you do UI on a CLI, it's front-end, right? If you do, if you're working on APIs and just reproducing your APIs like a Postman or Swagger, this page is a front-end, so people just make sometimes. Builder is amazing for building AIs also. So here I was using Blast. Blast is a very nice framework or library for creating that beautiful view that we saw on CLI. So I'm gonna have a bunch of methods for building like fragments of my UI. So I have set table, all the CSS that I might have for the application, and then I'm gonna have the build. Okay, a bunch of methods, right? But then I can see this working fine. So when I see this code, I know what it's doing there. I know the whole step by step. So I have set screen with the title, the layout. So I build first the square and then the search component and so on and so forth. So this is pretty amazing when you have complex objects, right? You have to do a bunch of steps you can break into different function calls. And set screen. Forgot the animation, right? And build. Nice. So yeah, Fluent API. So I noticed Builder and Fluent API are very similar. The difference is the Fluent API you can call the same function different times. So this example is a YouTube video I made making like a Fluent SQL builder. So we're gonna call each different functions, but this is not perform anything on the database. It's gonna go to the database only when I call build. This saves us a lot of processing time, right? Sometimes I see people like where, and you run filter, and then like limit, and then you have, this is crazy, right? The best way for us is to work with fields on demand, so this helps a lot. Well, this happens a lot, right? Either you fix your code to pass the unit test, or just remove the unit test, right? It's crazy. This for me was the mind-blowing when I noticed this. So you have a design pattern for helping on testing. Has anyone seen this before? Oh, nice. I would say your mind is gonna blow now. Well, what is the point here? I'm gonna have a class or a function or a object, and the default value is valid. So here I'm just making an example with fetch. So the default thing is it's gonna return a single JSON line, and the status is 200 and status text is okay. Then I can have different functions for that. So imagine 500. I can build a different object. 404, different object. Invalid body, exactly the same thing. So I can fluently build my object instead of just copying and pasting, right? For using cases. So this is it's pretty straightforward. When we see this in practice, see how beautiful it is. A response with status 404 and dot build. Exactly what I wanted. So you can have like someone working with people from product or business building all those different status for your object, and then you can just call and reuse this, right? And the cool thing about JavaScript, you can use this in both backend and frontend, which is completely controversial now, right? What is backend and frontend? All right, so you can call your data there, and we have observer. This is something that is the foundation of JavaScript, and people sometimes forget it. In Node.js, we have event emitter. In the browser, we have event target, right? Everything is based on events, and all of them came from the observer. So in the observer, you just, it's the theory like, instead of calling, instead of polling, right? Asking you for the information all the time, I say, okay, I'm gonna hold you now. When I'm ready, I'm gonna call you back, okay? So the whole point here is I'm gonna subscribe, I'm gonna put a bunch of listeners here, and then when I'm ready to send an event, I'm just notify everyone. This is exactly the same. The on object we have for subscribing to events, and for notifying we use emit. So this is how Node.js and a bunch of other patterns are doing behind the scenes. But like I was doing some application on the front ends on the website, and I noticed the event target is doing a bunch of stuff. I wanted just to have something like the event emitter. So I would use this class to make something simpler, and it's not gonna cost the whole life cycle of a page. So it's nice. And then just one thing that I miss here, it's from TypeScript or for other languages, is to have at least interface, right? Because now I have to make sure all observers have that function notify. So I'm gonna have to make some, I would say, workarounds to make sure they are implementing this function. So this is probably something harder in JavaScript, but it's all set. All right. Well, thinking about the same thing, we can have different functions doing a bunch of stuff. What I'm gonna do here now, I'm gonna try monitoring the performance of this API, sending events for different observers. So I will have the log observer, and I would say I'm gonna have the analytics observer. So one is just gonna print out results, and the other it's gonna run all the time I have something new, I'm gonna send to a different API. So this is pretty straightforward, and see, they are just following the same interface. They are using exactly the same name, and this is key for us to start working. Nice. I told you it's a lot of information, right? So now, when I'm using this, I'm gonna use subscribe, log, subscribe, analytics, right? When we are using Node.js, we're gonna have like analytics dot, I would say, yeah, it's gonna say like subject dot on and execute something, exactly for everyone, right? But when I'm calling the notify, all the subscribers are gonna be called, right? So this is, it's pretty straightforward when we're working with a bunch of objects, and this is pretty common to see in JavaScript, but people don't often see where this came from, and it's very nice. All right, and decorator. Well, this one, I often ask my students about what is decorator, right? They call me and say, no, decorator is this that we might see in JavaScript, right? In TypeScript, and I hope in JavaScript soon, right? It's in the last stage in the TC39, but this is one of the hardest things, I would say, to implement in JavaScript. But internally, this is just a proxy, right? just a wrapper that we're gonna put on the wall, and we're gonna try processing something and just keep the process going on. So see here, I know it's a bunch of code, but what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna use measure time, and then I'm gonna pass through a function. It's exactly the same thing I would use with at. So I'm gonna have the function. I'm gonna notify all my observers that this function is about to start, and then I can call it and actually execute it. So I'm gonna mark the performance when this started. I'm gonna notify everyone, and then on this function, I'm gonna actually execute the current function, and then I'm gonna notify again all of them. Okay? So I'm gonna have the duration and notify when this came from. So I think with this example makes more sense to analyze how to use them. And then I'm gonna use the performance decorator and see how we can use it. We can just have, it's not so beautiful, right, in JavaScript yet, but it's exactly the same thing that we put at measure time, and we would do exactly the same thing. See, sometimes, this design patterns, I would say it's from 80s, right? It's a long time ago that it's able to use, but as the language doesn't provide this by default, we sometimes like, oh, I'm not sure if I should use this or not. But I would say probably most of APMs, right, the application performance monitoring tools, they are using this kind of approach to handle it. So let's see if this works in practice. This is the application I told you that I made. So there in the web, I can have the tag web. On my server, I'm gonna see the web is coming there. So it's exactly the same application, and I'm gonna receive exactly the same behavior. See, this is a very complex behavior, right? I'm monitoring, I'm logging everything using different JavaScript code bases, but they are working in Node.js and in the browser with no frameworks, no Webpack, only JavaScript. So for me, it was really mind-blowing. All right, I told you I'm gonna teach you the secret for consuming terabytes of data with JavaScript, right? Well, we have the async iterator protocol. So what is the point of JavaScript? People come from C# and other programming languages, and they're like, oh, but JavaScript is not so good because I cannot put all these objects in memory and just try processing. No, the key in Node.js is to process data on demand. As soon as you have the data, you just pass through and keep going. So let's see, how's the problem in practice? Well, my beautiful application, right? Bootstrap, yeah, nice. So the problem here is, when I'm starting the application, I can see this whole white thing, right? So it's something is causing some bottlenecks here, and it's not so perfect for my experience. So if I take a look at the current API, I'm gonna see that the API is writing data and waiting for some time. So instead of holding the whole data in memory and then calling on end, it's calling all the time it's available. So what if we could grab this data on the front-end side, on the website, without having to wait for the whole thing to finish? And using ATP, right? Something that I didn't notice. I'm using here response.write. So if I call this 100 times, it's gonna call our response on the website there 100 times too. So we can start consuming this right away because it's a socket, right? But then just to finish the whole request, you just call end. So now we're gonna change a bit our code. Now I'm gonna say I'm gonna use web streams to consume this data. So what I tell here, I tell, well, once you are ready, once you start receiving data from the front-end side, you can start reading this in chunks, in small fragments, right? So in the red chunks here, I'm just making sure I have a full JSON item. And then once I have the full JSON item, I'm just parsing, and I'm using yield just to call back and just start rendering or parsing data on demand. So this is pretty nice. So this is, in my opinion, the most powerful tool we have in JavaScript, because we can process data on demand. Well, in other talk I gave about Node.js streams, I was consuming the random, the dash random on Linux, which is an infinite file, right? So people say, oh, how is the limit of memory I can consume? I was like, it's infinite, because I mean, it's a bit cheering, right? Because we can consume this data as like, let's say 1 megabyte, 2 megabytes. So it doesn't matter the size. Once we have ready, we just sending right away. So it's nice. So let's see how different is the code now. If we run the application now, see, it's smooth now. Even though I have a performance issue on the backend side, once I have the application running, once I have the first item, I start rendering. I don't need to wait. For users, it's way better. And for the backend side, exactly the same behavior. So it's exactly the same code using on both back and front end. Just notice one thing. I'm using web streams here, right? So web streams are ready to use in both Node.js and web browsers. But Node.js strings is a completely different specification. So you cannot use in the browser yet. All right. Did you like it? Woohoo! Nice. So now, as I told you, right? Nothing is for free. Now you have a task. So you go there later. I'm going to show you the barcode. So all the step-by-step I use on my slides, I put on those folders. So you can go there and start noticing. And you can start applying on your job or trying fixing things that you are just copying and pasting, because this might help a lot. Later, I want to know what was the mind-blowing design pattern that you'll find out, okay? Well, my talk tomorrow is about recreating Node.js from scratch. So it was the crazy experience I have done on my whole life. So I built a ebook. So if you want to go there, there are also challenges for you to implement your own rig file on Node.js using libuv, C++, and everything. Man, this was crazy. But yeah, go to my talk tomorrow. You're going to see more stuff about this. Okay? Well, all the content I've been doing is already on my website. I would say most of them, because it's missing to update, right? I should follow my own words, right? Once it's available, I should put there, right? Not wait in memory. Yeah. I should follow my words. All right, so that's it for today. If you want to take a picture for this, because this took me a long time, I want you to follow along. Show to your bosses too. And before we finish, I have like a tradition to make people envy at home, right? So I'm going to record a video. I'm going to do, woo! Okay? Nice. So on 3, oops. Let me try. So I'm going to count on 3, and we just hands on the air, okay? So 1, 2, 3. Aye! Thank you so much for having me.
If everyone have some question. No question?
Well, let me ask a question. What, like the guy in the back, what was your best design pattern for you? The last one, async integrators, consuming terabytes of data in JavaScript is mind-blowing, right? Java developers got crazy. It's nice. All right?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Eric.